Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, ne EGUA da, medinde Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akan, Akwamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, Odwirafo. That means greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning African Black people. Today is EGUA Day, Marketplace Day. My name is Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akan. Odwirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America. Yet I say, we thank you once again for tuning into the show. We are going to place some links in the chat room for the information that we will be addressing tonight. The Akwamu Economic Development page, we're going to place that link in the chat room. And we will also place a link to one of our publications. We'll type that in right now, the NHOMA link to our 16 books. We're going to touch on some of the information in our book, Hoodoo People, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in North America, Akan, Custodians of Hoodoo, from ancient Hoodoo, Udunu land, ancient Khanit, Nubia. So that link is in there. And so for individuals who are new to the programs, we have 3 shows on a weekly basis. We have Akan Nanasom, ancient, authentic Akan ancestry religion on Joada on Mondays. We deal with the Akan expression of ancestry religion. Number 1, of course, because we are Akan. Number 2, because there's misinformation that has been propagated by individuals in the Western Hemisphere with regard to Akan culture, philosophy, ancestry religion, cosmology, and so forth, the nature of the abosom, the nature of the nananom, the deities and ancestral spirits, the nature of the great mother and great father, the supreme being, Nyamewa Nyame, and the creator and creatress, Yonkumpon and Yonkunton, and so forth. So we're giving proper information. As well, there's been misinformation propagated by Akan people from the continent, Ghana, as well as Ivory Coast, individuals who have been infected with white culture, pseudo-religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and other corrupt pseudo-religious perversions have woven some of that corruption into the fabric of their cultural practices over the past 100 to 200 years. And so, therefore, when we come in contact with such individuals, it appears on the surface that what they are engaging in is traditional culture, traditional religion, traditional cosmology, but in reality, there's an infection very deep within. So we're dealing with ancient, authentic Akan ancestry religion on Joada, showing the direct connection from Akan Fo here in the Western Hemisphere to our direct ancestral culture from our blood relatives, ancestresses, and ancestors in West Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnut, and all the way back to ancient Khanit, ancient Nubia, showing that there's a direct cultural continuum, direct spiritual continuum, and direct genetic continuum. So this culture is within our blood circle. We come into the world, born into the world with this culture because it's ancestrally transmitted, ancestrally inherited, and it's something that we carry transcarnation. So we get into detail about that on Joda on Monday. On Benada or Abinada Tuesday, we have Ojira, which means purification. It also means a celebration of purification. In the Akan language, Jida means purification and a celebration of purification in the language of ancient Kemet and Khanit as well. Because again, it's the same language directly derived from our ancient ancestresses and ancestors. So we deal with Ojira purification. We deal with ancestral religion in general. Nanasong, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, ancestral religion in general. We purify concepts, purify understanding of cosmology, purify understanding of culture. We deal with ancient texts as well as ritual practices that are still practiced today on the continent, as well as how we have brought these practices with us in our blood circles to the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kesi, the great perversity, the enslavement era, and we've continued to utilize our ancestral religious practices to embolden ourselves, to fortify ourselves, edify ourselves, and defend ourselves and free ourselves from enslavement. And we've dealt with that, and we're going to deal with some more of that tonight. The whole point of Ojira is purification. Ojira purification operationalizes Nanasom. Purification operationalizes Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut ancestral religion. So we're restoring our ancestral religious practices to their pure foundation, divine order, Nyamewa, Nyame, Nsheke, that is carried with us in our blood circle, transcarnation. No one can give us our culture. We are born with our culture. It is assigned to us by the Supreme Being and carried within our blood circle transcarnationally, direct from our ancestresses and ancestors to us. So we deal with various aspects of that and how our ancestral religious culture impacts every aspect of our lives. So that's on Ojira Da, or Purification Day, on that broadcast. On, of course, tonight, EGUA Marketplace Day, we deal with Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Black businesses, organizations, and institutions, promoting Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit businesses, organizations, and institutions, those individuals who are and groups who are serving our community in a positive capacity with their products and services, but also transmitting our ancestral religious values in the process. So we have a number of businesses, owners, organization owners, founders, institution builders, and so forth who have come on, and we will have more coming on. All of the interviews and so forth you will find on the Blog Talk page. And in that vein, we have also published, a few months ago, we published our document, Akan Economic Development Model. So we have an economic development model rooted in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religious philosophy. And this is our approach to developing ourselves economically as an Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in a holistic fashion. So we have published that model. We put the link in the chat room to the Akan Economic Development Model page on our website. We also have an Akan Economic Development page on Facebook as well, the companion page. And what we are doing with that model, number one, the model explicates our approach to economic development rooted in our culture and rooted in the 7 principal values of Amansesew, or nation building, restoration, and the spiritual component of that. And then we also have a strategy rooted in that cosmology. And the strategy is to starve the beast and feed the pride. Once we become grounded in who we are, what our function in creation is, and how that is related to economic activity, as well as political and social and otherwise, then we don't have to teach our people to, engage in cooperative economic. It's automatic. Once you align with who you are spiritually, you are naturally drawn consciously and spiritually to connect with other Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people and share and interact and exchange on every level. So that's part of the model. And once that's established spiritually, then all we need is a strategy for the optimal use of our funds, optimal use of our resources. Our strategy, as shown in the model, is to starve the beast and feed the pride. So that simply means that we make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds we are spending with the whites and our offspring, what funds we would have wasted with the whites and our offspring, and then we starve the beast and feed the pride. We reallocate those funds that we would have spent at different white businesses like Starbucks or McDonald's or CVS or 7-Eleven, or wasting on products, foods, and other kinds of products that we really do not need, that really have no benefit for us. Instead of wasting those funds with the whites and their offspring and receiving products and services that are absolutely unnecessary, we starve that white beast and feed the pride. We take those funds away from those white businesses and reallocate them to the Black business organization or institution of the week. We are targeting one Black business organization or institution per week for 52 weeks. We are actually in week number 15, 14 businesses, organizations, and institutions as a community so far. And the more people who join, for example, our Akan Economic Development page on Facebook and like that page and share it, we have hundreds of people who have liked the page. the more people who participate, the more these black businesses receive when we're in that operation of starving the beast and feeding the pride. So we've supported 14 businesses so far. We're tangibly reallocating resources from the beast and feeding the pride. So this is week number 15, and the business of the week is Kamali Academy, owned by Dr. Samori Kamara, an educational institution. They deal with homeschooling. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut are African-centered homeschooling. They have developed an extensive, effective curriculum. They have online classes. They have a number of different things. So when you go to the Oklahoma Economic Development page, you will see the link to Kamali Academy, so you can go directly to the website. And then we also have a link to one of the videos where you'll be able to see Dr. Samori Kamara talking about the organization, the institution, and everything that they're doing. And then we're going to have the brother come on the show possibly next week, so we can sit down and just talk about everything that they're doing, all the great work that they're doing. So that is the business of the week, the organization, actually the institution of the week, Kamali Academy. So when you go to the Oklahoma Economic Development page, that is the business we're targeting. Starve the beast and feed the pride. Take the funds you would have wasted with the whites and their offspring on payday or even before payday and reallocate those funds directly to Kamali Academy. If 1,000 of our people took $5 that they would have spent at Starbucks or would have spent at CVS, 7-Eleven buying drinks or chips or danishes or something like that in the course of a week, products that have no beneficial effect for us. If 1,000 people took that $5, starved that beast, and redirected it to the Black Business Institution of the Week, then that institution will receive a $5,000 infusion of capital. That is a tangible support for a black institution. Therefore, they can hire more people in the community. They can serve the community at a greater capacity. They can expand their services, of course, keep their institution open and so forth. So it's always a win-win when we engage that process. If we do not engage that process, if we do not starve the beast and feed the pride, then by default, we are supporting our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring, which, of course, is insane. So this is, again, week number 15, so please go to the Oklahoma Economic Development page. You will see all of the various businesses that we've supported so far, and we're expanding the list on a regular basis. You'll see all of the businesses. You'll see all of their links to their direct websites. You'll also see links to the various interviews that they have done with us when they came on the show and sat with us for 2 hours and talked about their products and services and their philosophy behind serving the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnut community. All of that is on the Oklahoma Economic Development page, and also the Oklahoma Economic Development model itself. You can download that. And we also have a 4-part series that we did on Blog Talk Radio on this show, the EGUA Marketplace show, going into detail, clarifying and going through the Oklahoma Economic Development model line by line, and then also showing how it applies to various aspects of our lives. So that 4-part series, which we saved as YouTube videos, you can download that 4-part series on that page as well. You can also download 2 other videos. One is EGUA Kodi, Economic Warfare, and we deal with economic warfare. We're talking about the Oklahoma Economic Development model in the sense, with the proper understanding that just as our ancestresses and ancestors who were enslaved in the Western Hemisphere, once they arrived here, they recognized that, of course, the whites and their offspring were in control politically, and they were living behind enemy lines. So every time our people engaged with one another, interacted with one another, exchanged resources, exchanged ideas, exchanged materials, it was always with that recognition, with that consciousness that they were engaging in some form of exchange behind enemy lines. Every exchange, every activity was designed to strike towards liberation. They didn't just sit around exchanging ideas and telling jokes. They didn't sit around and exchanging, goods just to, make themselves feel good. Everything was based on a recognition that we are behind enemy lines, and everything we need to exchange between one another must support our goal of liberation. And they did that and freed themselves from enslavement, and we're going to get into that tonight. So in the same fashion, we are still behind enemy lines until we establish an independent nation that is self-governing, self-ruling, sovereign, and secure in its sovereignty. We are behind enemy lines, so every time we exchange any form of funds, resources, goods, and so forth, capital, we must recognize it should be used as a strike against the enemy. Every time we spend $1, it is a strike against the enemy. So we must recognize we are behind enemy lines, and we must move in that fashion. So that video is there, and then the Sankopa, the Kwadefo ne Amamre, self-employment and ancestral religion. That broadcast video is there as well, and we're talking about self-employment from the spiritual perspective, which extends to the social perspective. Self dealing with the soul, the divine consciousness, the Akrawa, the soul, the divine consciousness, the divinity that dwells in the head region of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. That is what governs our functioning creation. It carries our functioning creation and shows us what did we come into the world to execute. What set of activities were we fashioned by the Supreme Being to execute? What kind of cell within the great divine body are we, and what are we naturally wired to execute in creation? What kinds of functions? That's wired in our craft, our divine consciousness, our self. And then we also have specific capacity, specific configuration of spiritual energy that's given to us by the Supreme Being so that we can execute our function, to empower us to execute that function. We employ our energy, our spiritual capacity to execute our function. That is self-employment internally. And then we extend that activity socially. We engage in self-employment. But first, we're grounded spiritually in ourselves, who we are, and we employ our capacities, and then we can move forward with self-employment with regard to economic activity socially so that we can move forward in a harmonious fashion, in a productive fashion, as opposed to engaging in some form of self-employment that actually has a negative effect on the community and is supportive of the whites and our offspring. So all of that information you will find on the Akan Economic Development page. For those individuals on the phone line, if you have a question or a comment, just hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. For individuals in the chat room, if you have a question or comment in the chat room, you must log in as a user because you can't interact as a guest. If you don't have a username, you can sign up for one very quickly in Blog Talk. And also, when you're on our Blog Talk channel, if you on that page, if you look and see the follow button, click the follow button to subscribe to our page. That way you will be on the list. So every time we have a new broadcast that's coming up, or we very often, lately we've been saving these broadcasts and making them into YouTube videos and publishing those for ease of sharing our various social media networks. Anytime we have a new book coming out, a new article, new broadcast, you'll be automatically notified. You can also follow us on Twitter as Odwirafo, follow us on YouTube as Odwirafo, on Instagram as Odwirafo, on Facebook, Kwesi Akan on Facebook, but you can also type in Odwirafo or Afuraitkaitnut, and you'll find us that way as well. And then we also have, and we'll put this in the chat room right now, our own separate social media network, Afuraitkaitnut.ning.com. A social media network separate from the other networks. It's a private network that we pay for, a platform on the Ning platform, and therefore you can join that network, set up a profile. We post blogs, post videos, post discussions, post articles and everything else, sharing information. So it's similar to Facebook in the sense, but it's simply our network. And it's a way that people who are studying the same kind of information can all come to one space and share information and so forth. And finally, we also, for the last of these announcements, we just want to put also the link in the chat room, the FEKU page on our website, FEKUW. FEKU means a group or an organization or an association. The Feku page on our website is talking about the founding of Nanasom Feku, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, ancestral religion study groups. We are institutionalizing Nanasom, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, ancestral religion. When we talk about, of course, ancestral religion, it's the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. So through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we restore balance to our lives by rejecting those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our lives. These are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion, the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. All Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people are wired pre-incarnation with this natural inclination to restore order, incorporate law, and restore order to our lives. That is ancestral religion. It is transferred to us by our ancestors and ancestors, but it is planted in us, in our kra, in the beginning, pre-incarnation, by the Supreme Being. So we are born into the world with a culture. We have our bosom forces in nature who are assigned to us pre-incarnation by the Supreme Being. We have enslavement, ancestresses and ancestors from our blood circle who are assigned to us pre-incarnation by the Supreme Being to guide us throughout the course of our lives. So before we even come into the world, we already have abosom and enslavement, deities and ancestral spirits who are assigned to us. So we come into the world with a culture. All we need to do is recognize that culture and embrace that culture and exercise that culture. We don't have to go somewhere else outside of our blood circle and leave our people to go find the culture and bring it back to our people. We are born with a culture. Nobody can give us a culture. Nobody can give us ancestral religion. We are born with that because Nyame wa Nyame, the Supreme Being, has given us that and wired that within us. So the institutionalization of Nanasom, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, ancestral religion from its pure, authentic perspective is what we're dealing with. So people are beginning to form ancestral religion study groups, Nanasom Feku, with one or more people, whether you meet online or you meet in person, wherever you are in the world. So we have a specific curriculum that we recommend, starting with our publication, Kukutuntun, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, and various other publications and so forth. So when you go to that page, you'll see Feku, you'll see the description of that, how you can form a study group in your area with one or more people. Of course, this is something that you will be doing independent. It's not something that is, based on being up under our administration. This is something you'll be doing independent, but we do have a guideline for optimal, to achieve optimal benefit when you establish such a study group, such a Nanasom Feku. So we have that information, and we have a list of publications. We have 16 books, over 60 articles. Of course, we have 131 broadcasts to date. This is number 132. All of the archives you can access, and we also have videos from our Ustream broadcast, internet TV broadcasts that we did in the past before we started doing Blog Talk. Those are on the YouTube page as well, where we go into our books and articles and so forth and give greater clarity to these issues dealing with cosmology and ritual and so forth. So you have a number of resources, a great deal of resource material to investigate. So we put that information in order. And for anybody who establishes a study group or is part of a study group of Feku, then when you order any of our soft cover books, you automatically receive them for 30% off the regular retail price. The regular retail price of our 16 books ranges between $8 and $11. But then when you start a Feku, a study group, then you get those publications for 30% off that $8 to $11 price range. So we make them as reasonable as possible. All right. I think we put the link in there. Okay, yeah, we did. All right. So we're going to get into the piece tonight. The Gullah Wars, and we're talking about independent Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut communities. It's part 2. We did a part 1 a couple of months back, talking about independent Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut communities. We talked about Dismal Swamp in Virginia, South Carolina, and so forth, dealing with how our people established an independent settlement, freed themselves from enslavement, went into Dismal Swamp. At one point, over 2,000 people living in that area intergenerationally, growing crops, growing food, raising their children intergenerationally, and defending themselves against the whites who attempted to enslave them, to the point where some of the whites began to ask them for peace treaties. We'd established an independent, sovereign nation, and we were secure in our sovereignty right in the midst of the enslavement era. And that was just one of those communities. And we talked about a number of different communities, black towns and so forth, all over the United States, South, West, and so forth, as well as in the North. We're going to deal with, in this broadcast, we're going to deal with the Gullah Wars. Of course, this is directly connected in many ways to economic development, because once you become independent, then you need an economic system. When we talk about the 7 principal values of Amansesew, or nation building, we talk about if you're going to be independent, self-governing, self-ruling, sovereign, and securing your sovereignty on your own land, you must have methods of food production and preservation. You must have methods of curing disease. You must have a military structure to defend your nation. You must have the institutionalization of values, training institutions, cultural institutions, ritual institutions, and so forth, to reinforce the values of the culture in every member of the society, children and adults. And once people value the culture, then they will seek to defend the culture and perpetuate the culture and perpetuate the nation. You must have sound systems of governance and jurisprudence. You must have methods of building homes and so forth, engaging in engineering on acquired land, and of course you must be able to clothe yourself and develop textiles and so forth. So these 7 principal values of Amansesew, of course, is directly related to economic development. We engage in exchange when we deal with agriculture, when we deal with curing disease, when we deal with textiles, when we deal with construction of homes on acquired land, when we deal with institution building. So we want to deal with the Gullah people and the Gullah Wars, very often mislabeled the Seminole Wars, that puts a gloss on what the wars really were. So first we're going to deal with, and you can download information. There's a great deal of information dealing with the Gullah people on many different sites, many quote-unquote African-American sites and Gullah heritage sites. You have the Gullah Geechee Nation. They have their own site. They also have a page on Facebook and so forth, dealing with, cultural preservation and so forth. So a number of different sites you'll find information in different areas. First, we want to deal with, before we get into the Gullah Wars, and very often mislabeled the Seminole War, we want to deal with who the Gullah people actually are. When they talk about the Seminole Wars, or really the Gullah Wars, talking about Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people primarily, and we're going to talk about the Gullah ethnic groups and so forth, but fighting against the U.S. government for decades, for years, waging war, killing hundreds and hundreds of crackers, upwards of nearly 1,500 to 1,000 crackers over the course of a number of years. Waging war because they were free. They were free, independent, established their own independent settlements, raising food, raising children intergenerationally. When the whites and their offspring, the U.S. government came to try to take that civilization down, then they went to war for years, for decades, for over a decade, for decades. So first we want to get into who the Gullah people are, and we want to deal with some of the ethnic groups that comprise the Gullah. So if you look in what they call the low country region of the United States, South Carolina, Georgia, going down into Florida and so forth, lower North Carolina into South Carolina, all the way down into parts of Florida. That was originally the quote-unquote Gullah territory. This is what we're dealing with. So when you look at the Gullah people, we want to look at a number of different groups that have come together, forced into enslavement, into the Western Hemisphere, forced into these regions, the southern part of North Carolina through South Carolina, Georgia all the way through to Florida. First, we want to look at some of the roots of the people. So you'll find different percentages of who made up the Gullah people. The term Gullah, some people will say it comes from Angola. Some people will say it comes from Gola. Gola is a group in what is today's Sierra Leone, in West Afuraitkaitnut, as well as Liberia. Of course, these are, foreign terms for these areas, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Sierra Leone being established by the British as a colony for Afuraitkaitnut people who were enslaved in America to go and settle after, fighting and trying to free themselves from enslavement. They set up a colony, and many of our people went and established themselves in that colony beginning in the late so-called 18th century, 1700s. We had individuals, for example, Paul Kofi, who was a free Afurakani individual in New England. He had a shipping company, and he was engaged in business and so forth. In the late 18th century, he established a school, as a matter of fact, but he was also very active in helping to resettle people Sierra Leone in the late 1700s. So again, when we talked about previously, when they talk about this whole notion of we were enslaved for 400 years, some of our people came over here in the 1700s, and in the late 1700s, they were already resettling themselves in Sierra Leone and then later into Liberia as well. So Sierra Leone, the colony established primarily for Afuraitkaitnut people in America who had been enslaved to come and reestablish themselves on the continent. Liberia was also a colony established by the American Colonization Society. Afuraitkaitnut people leaving, getting away from the enslavement era or territories and reestablishing themselves on the continent. So when they talk about Sierra Leone and Liberia, this is what we're dealing with. But the Gullah people, ethnic group around those areas, around Sierra Leone, Liberia, some people will say this is where the name Gullah comes from. All right. And then people also refer to, they're also referred to as Geechee, or the language that they speak, the Geechee people, or Gullah Geechee and so forth. So as far as the ethnic groups of the people, according to the Port of Charleston records, enslaved Afuraitkaitnut people shipped to the port came from the following areas: Angola, 39% of the population of the Gullah people, about 39% from Angola, Central Afuraitkaitnut. Senegambia, which is today's Senegal and Gambia, about 20%. The Windward Coast, about 17%. The Gold Coast, about 13%. The Windward Coast is Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and the Gold Coast is what is called Ghana. So the combination of Ghana and Ivory Coast is 17% and 13%, but together that's about 30%. That's important because, again, those borders are artificial. The borders of the Ivory Coast and Ghana, the way they're structured now, about 42% of the people of Ivory Coast are Akan. About 45% of the people of Ghana are Akhan. So you'll find that you have about 9 million Akan folk in Ivory Coast. You have about 12 million or 11 million Akan folk in Ghana. So totally, between those two countries, there are about 20 million Akan people in West Afuraitkaitnut. So when they talk about here the Windward Coast, that's the Ivory Coast. When they talk about the Gold Coast, that's Ghana. So 17% from the Windward Coast and 13% from the Gold Coast. That's about 30% of the population, or of the Gullah people coming from those areas, and a large, maybe about half of that 30%, were about somewhere around half would have been Akan. From Sierra Leone, about 6%. You also have people from Madagascar, Mozambique, and the two bites. So you combine, and like 6% from 6% from Sierra Leone and Madagascar, Mozambique, and the two bites combined, about 5%. So from Central Afuraitkaitnut, about 39%, Senegal and Gambia, 20%, the Windward Coast and the Gold Coast together is about 30%, Sierra Leone about 6%, and then of course South and Southeast Afuraitkaitnut, Madagascar, Mozambique, about 5%. So a number of different groups from different parts of West and Central and parts of South Afuraitkaitnut, all together making up the Gullah people. These are the records that you find in the port of Charleston. Now, when you look within the language, and people have done studies and of the various terms that the people use, you'll find these same ethnic groups and their language showing up in the Gullah Geechee dialect. So Chikango words and Fon words and Efe words and Akan words and Gas, Adangbe words and Yoruba words and Igbo words and so forth, Mindi words and everything else. You'll find all of these different words, hundreds and hundreds of these various words as part of the dialect. So it just bears out what is, shown with regard to the records as far as the ports of where the people who were enslaved, what countries they came from. So the Gullah people are a collection of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. Now, let's get into what took place. So the Black Seminoles, a small offshoot of the Gullah people who escaped from the rice plantations in South Carolina and Georgia. They built their own settlements on the Florida frontier, fought a series of wars to preserve their freedom, and were scattered across North America. They have played a significant role in American history, but have never received the recognition they deserve. And this is just one of the articles coming from Yale University, just talking about basic things. There are certain points that they make, but there are other points that we want to expand upon that they don't make here. But this is just a basic general truthstory that you can get from various places all over the internet, as well as when you come in contact with people who are Gullah and they talk about their truthstory. Some of the Gullah who were enslaved managed to escape from the coastal South Carolina and Georgia south into the Florida Peninsula. In the so-called 18th century, the 1700s, Florida was a vast tropical wilderness covered with quote-unquote jungles and malaria-ridden swamps. The Spanish claimed Florida, but they used it only as a buffer between the British colonies and their own settled territories farther south. They wanted to keep Florida as a dangerous wilderness frontier, so they offered a refuge to escape Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, who had escaped from enslavement. And then they also talk about pseudo-Native Americans from neighboring South Carolina and Georgia. Now, in articles such as this, they'll say they gave it to them as a refuge. They didn't give it to them as a refuge. They just talked about how it was basically a tropical wilderness. There was malaria and everything else. Our people were from the tropics, of course. We had the immunity to the tsetse fly. We had that immunity to that malaria. We could live in those tropical areas. We could work in those tropical areas. Those areas, however, were a grave for the whites and their offspring. They couldn't handle yellow fever. They couldn't handle malaria and so forth. They couldn't deal with that. So they didn't give up these areas. When we escaped to these areas, we set up shop in these areas. The whites and their offspring, including the Spanish, would try to, attack our people. We would be ready to wage war. And they couldn't handle that warrior spirit. And they just said, well, listen, we'll just, quote unquote, work together. We'll stay further south. You are in between the forest areas and the British. The Spanish said we'll stay further south. As long as there's no friction, we'll stay where we are and you stay where you are. So when the British came, of course, we were at the forefront because we were in between the tropical forest areas. The British were further north of that, and then the Spanish were south of that, and we were in between. So we were the first line that the British would hit before they got to the Spanish. And the Spanish didn't mind that. They didn't want to go through us, and they didn't want to go through that tropical wilderness. So they stayed where they were. All right. So when you read these articles, you have to read between the lines. They will very often gloss these things. So the Gullahs were establishing their own free settlements in the Florida wilderness by at least the late 1700s. Now, once again, this whole idiotic notion that we were enslaved for 400 years, we went into detail about that, and we talked about the 400-year stele in ancient Kemet, where they got that 400-year figure from. But there was never a 400-year period in America and so forth. But we're talking about the late 1700s. You had a large groups of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people who had escaped from enslavement and set up independent communities in the late 1700s. Many of them arrived here in the 1700s, and they freed themselves in the 1700s and set up their independent nations in the 1700s. At the same time, in the late 1700s, Sierra Leone was established as well after the Revolutionary War. So they built separate villages of thatched roof houses surrounded by fields of corn and swamp rice, and they maintained friendly relations with the mixed population of refugee, quote-unquote, Indians or pseudo-Native Americans. And, of course, when they talk about the Windward Coast, the Ivory Coast, they also called that the Grain Coast and the Rice Coast as well, because we were adept at, cultivating rice as our crop. So they were doing the same thing here. All right. Now, okay, so going back. In time, the two groups came to view themselves as part of the same loosely organized tribe in which blacks held important positions of leadership. That's another gloss. Primarily and typically, we were separate. The only time that we participated or collaborated is if some of the pseudo-Native Americans were in their regions in that part of Florida. We were in our regions in that part, adjacent regions in Florida. But once the British began to invade, and we were already in free territories, then we would fight the British off because we didn't want them to come and burn down the plantations that we built for ourselves independently, and we fought and, waged war against them. It wasn't a situation where we all felt we were all together, and we're going to get into that later because we were never really all together. These pseudo-Native Americans were our enemies and still are now, and they call themselves Mexicans and all various forms of white Hispanics, white Latinos, and so forth. They have been our enemies from the beginning. We were living in these areas just like today. These white Hispanics live in areas adjacent to black communities. We typically do not integrate. We do not. Every now and then there's some mixture from a brainwashed Afuraitkaitnut person, but typically we do not integrate. We do not want to be around each other. We just happen to be forced into the same areas because the Western European, the Western Eurasian is in control economically and politically, but we're living in the same area. It was the same going back then. The Western Eurasian further north was in control. At this point, our people were independent. We had our own nation, our independence. Native Americans, they had their own independence, but once the Western Eurasian comes down, the British come down, or so-called Americans come down and began to invade, then, we want to push them off. So there's a fragile alliance just for that purpose. Just like right now. There's a fragile alliance. If we were to join, the army or something like that to fight off an invasion from China, and you have black people and so-called Hispanics in the same army fighting off an invasion from the Chinese, that does not mean that because we were in the same army and fighting against the same quote-unquote enemy or invader, that somehow all of a sudden we were blended and we were family and we loved one another. That's insane. It wasn't true back then, it's not true now. So, okay. So when we talk about those separate communities, and then they start talking about some of these things that took place. So when they say blacks held certain important positions of leadership, we're going to show why that's a gloss as well. The Gullahs adopted some of the brainwashed amongst our people adopted quote-unquote Indian clothing, while the Indians acquired a taste for rice and appreciation for Gullah music and folklore. Them trying to invade the culture, corrupt the culture. And today they do the exact same thing when you have white Hispanics, white Latinos, and Latinas trying to embrace quote-unquote Afuraitkaitnut culture, trying to become Yoruba, trying to get involved in the Yoruba tradition, dealing with the Orisha, getting involved in Hoodoo or something like that, or Candomblé. That's not them showing an appreciation for the culture. It's them trying to invade and destroy the culture like parasites and bringing their perverse values and dissexuality and everything else, trying to graft that onto the culture. And only brainwashed blacks would allow that to take place. Conscious Afuraitkaitnut people recognize that the Orisha do not deal with these white, Hispanic, pseudo-Native Americans, migrant Asians. Just like they did in the past, they're trying to do now. All right, so, but they say, but the Gullahs were physically more suited to the tropical climate and possessed an indispensable knowledge of tropical agriculture. And without their assistance, the so-called Indians would not have been able to cope effectively with the Florida environment. The two groups led an independent in the wilderness of northern Florida, rearing several generations of children in freedom. And they recognized the American settlers and slave owners as the enemy. The Americans called the Florida Indians Seminoles, from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or untamed. And they called the runaway Gullahs, so-called runaway, but the Gullah people, Seminole Negroes or Indian Negroes. The only reason they called them that is because they saw us living in close proximity to one another. It's not some idiotic notion that some fools who would like to identify as Moors saying that that's because the copper-colored people were really our people and we were the ones who were here and they really weren't Native Americans. It was really our people. That's all nonsense, self-hating nonsense. And we've crushed that whole Moorish identity in our book, Moor Means Dead. You can download that for free. But the reason why the whites and offspring, they saw two different groups. They called the black Seminoles, and they called the pseudo-Native Americans the red Seminoles. Or they were calling the Seminole Negroes or the Indian Negroes, the ones who lived amongst the Indians. They had different names that they called people, but Seminole just meaning wild or untamed or also runaway. It's like cimarron or maroon, meaning one marooned or escaped. Okay, so the Seminole, and of course modern historians have called these free Gullah frontiersmen the black Seminole. Now, the Seminole settlements in Spanish Florida increased as more and more runaway Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, as well as some of these pseudo-Native Americans escaped south, and conflict with Americans was sooner or later inevitable. There were skirmishes in 1812 and 1816. In 1818, General Andrew Jackson, who would later become president, of course, led an American army into Florida to claim it for the United States. That's 1818, and war finally erupted. The blacks and the pseudo-Native Americans, so-called Indians, fought in a desperate struggle to stop the American advance, but they were defeated and driven south into the more remote wilderness of central and southern Florida. General Jackson, later president, referred to this first Seminole War as an Indian and Negro War, showing once again the separation and delineation between the pseudo-Native Americans and the blacks. So he called it an Indian and Negro War. In 1835, the Second Seminole War broke out. So there were skirmishes in 1812. The First War, 1818, forced to retreat further south. So they didn't get captured and taken into slavery. They just retreated further south, and the Americans took over that northern part of Florida. But they were still independent. They were just further south, more remote. 1835, the Second Seminole War broke out, and this full-scale guerrilla war would last for 6 years and claim the lives of 1,500 American soldiers. So we were slaughtering these crackers. Now, the black Seminoles waged the fiercest resistance as they feared that capture or surrender meant death or return to slavery. And they were more adept at living and fighting in the jungles than their Indian counterparts. And again, as we talked about last night, when we talked about Nechem, pleasure in the spirit realm and implications for warfare, we were going to fight to the death. There was no being captured by the whites and their offspring. We're either going to kill you or you're going to kill us. And we're going to win either way. Because if we kill you, we're going to win. If you kill us, then our spirits will simply go to the ancestral realm and we will live in harmony with our ancestors and experience all forms of pleasure and harmony and balance for the eternity of the time, the extent of the time that we remain in the ancestral realm until it's time for us to reincarnate, and we'll be right back into the world, right back at it again, waging war against these crackers, cracking their heads and slashing their throats. So that was 6 years. 6-year war, claimed the lives of 1,500 crackers. Now, the American commander, General Jessup, informed the War Department after this Second Seminole War. He said, quote, "This you may be assured." He's talking to the War Department of the United States. He's the general. So he's reporting on what happened. And he tells the War Department, quote, "This you may be assured is a Negro and not an Indian war, because it was our people who were waging the fiercest war. We were the most populous, and we were in control. It wasn't like we just had, positions of power, and it was really the native, so-called Native Americans, so-called Indians. This wasn't the Seminole War. These were the Gullah Wars, the Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut. It was our war against the United States that lasted for years. So this is why he said this was a Negro war and not an Indian war. Many people think that it was the Seminoles were the quote-unquote Native Americans, the Indians. And then there was a sprinkling of black people who joined up with them and became their little servants and helped them out. It was the other way around. These were the Gullah Wars, the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit war of resistance against the crackers. One nation, a black nation, waging war against a white nation. Now, and the U.S. congressman of the period commented that these black fighters were, quote, contending against the whole military power of the United States. So this is the congressman, bearing witness to the reality that this was a black nation, a Gullah nation, waging war against the entire military of the United States for years. Just like the United States was in Iraq for over 10 years, they were waging war and they were fighting against the Gullah nation, the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit nation, a group of various Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ethnic groups all came together to wage war against the crackers, and they were there for 6 years, bogged down in a guerrilla war with the Gullah people for 6 years. And if you think back to, the second Iraq war starting around 2003, and by the time 6-7 years in, Obama comes into office and talks about we're going to end the war in a couple of years. People were already war weary. By the 6th or 7th year, the United States was tired. Some people were saying we need to pull our people out. We're tired of this war, people being killed. There are a couple of thousand people dead. Well, at this time, at the 6-year mark of this war, we had already killed 1,500 American soldiers. And the Congress people, as well as the general, informing the War Department that this was a quote-unquote Negro war. When the Army finally captured some of the black Seminoles, officers refused to return them to slavery. Why? They feared that these seasoned warriors, accustomed to their freedom, would wreak havoc on the southern plantation. In 1842, the Army forcibly removed them, along with some of the Indians as well, the Indian Territory, now called Oklahoma, in the unsettled West. They didn't want to place them on plantations because these people have been living free since the late 1700s. They've been free for over 100 years. Some of our people got caught up and thrown on a boat, spent 90 days on a boat, got to the Western Hemisphere, took, stock of the situation, looked around, gathered their faculties, began to engage in, establishing plans, plotting a resistance movement, and then they freed themselves. They may have spent a couple of years at most in enslavement and then freed themselves. So they were warriors, and warriors said, they were like, listen, we got caught in wars on the continent. We got caught up. As warriors said, you get caught up, you get, captured, taken captive. You make sure that you fortify yourself, strengthen yourself, edify yourself, eat, strengthen yourself, maintain your focus, maintain your acuity and so forth, because once you get a chance to plot and plan, you're going to free yourself and you're going to strike against your enemy. And that's exactly what they did, and they freed themselves and went into the forest land and set up independent nations, and they've been living there for 100 years. So the Europeans the Western Eurasian, the Americans, they were like, listen, we can't put these people who have really never been enslaved. They were captured and quote-unquote jailed on plantations for a few years, but then they escaped. And they and their children and grandchildren have lived free and defended their freedom for over 100 years. You can't put these people on a plantation because they're going to massacre every cracker they see, and they're going to embolden the people on the plantations who have been born and raised on plantations and never seen anything resembling black freedom ever. They're going to stimulate within them, within their own spirits and their enslavement, to rise up against these crackers as well. So they were like, we're going to send them all the way to what is now Oklahoma, the unsettled part of the West that the whites in our spring had not yet begun to, control. So they sent them to Oklahoma. So they marched all the way from Florida to Oklahoma. Now, the black Seminoles, exiled from their Florida strongholds, were forced to continue their struggle for freedom on the western frontier. In Oklahoma, the government put them under the authority of the Creek Indians. The Creek Indians were slave owners, tried to curb their freedom, and white slave traders came at night to kidnap their women and children. So even though they didn't put them on plantations in the South, they sent them to Oklahoma, but they were supposed to be free, but then they put them under the jurisdiction, the administration of the Creek Indians, and they were slave owners as well. Because most of these so-called Native American groups, they're simply Western Eurasians. We'll get into the DNA in a minute. But they're simply Eastern Eurasians, brothers of their Western Eurasian counterparts, Western Europeans and white Americans. So they're the same people. They were enslaving our people whenever they had the chance. So in 1850, a group of black Seminoles and Seminole so-called Indians escaped south across Texas to the desert badlands of northern Mexico. They established a free settlement, and as in Florida, began to attract runaway enslaved Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, who freed themselves from across the border. In 1855, a heavily armed band of Texas Rangers rode into Mexico to destroy the Seminole settlement, and it was a nation. However, they were stopped. And these were Gullah people. These were black people, of course, coming from the east. They went through Oklahoma, left Oklahoma, went through Texas into Mexico, and these are the same Gullah people with their own nation, and they fought to defend themselves against the Texas Rangers. They stopped the Texas Rangers and forced them back into the United States. Now, the Indians soon returned to Oklahoma, but the black Seminoles remained in Mexico, fighting constantly to protect their settlement from the marauding Comanche and Apache Indians. Why did the Indians return to Oklahoma and the black people stayed in Mexico? Because the Indians were quote-unquote Indians, and when they went up under the Creek Indians, they were all brothers and sisters, so it was no problem. If the black people would have went, they would have been subjected to, the Creeks trying to enslave them once again showing the differences between the two. So they stayed in Mexico. They established their own independent nation in Mexico. When the United States, when the Texas Rangers came over to attack, they repelled them successfully. Now, in 1870, after emancipation of the enslaved, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in the United States, the U.S. cavalry in southern Texas invited some of the black Seminoles to return and join the army, and it officially established the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. After enslavement was over, they were like, all right, there's no more enslavement, but we'll hire you to join the army so you can scout and you can wage war against the Indians because you were more adept at hunting them down and capturing them. And some of our people joined up. Why? Because those cracker Indians had been enslaving our people. So we joined the army. We got paid to go and wage war and cut them down. And remember, the Comanche Indians and Apache Indians were waging war against our people, and we were constantly fighting them in Mexico. Now, so they were officially established as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. In 1875, 3 of the Scouts won the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is meaningless, America's highest military decoration, in a single engagement with the Comanche Indians on the Pecos River. The black Seminoles had fled the rice plantations, built their own free settlements in the Florida wilderness, and then fought almost continuously for 50 years to preserve their freedom. It is little wonder they should provide some of the finest soldiers in the U.S. cavalry. Today, there are still small black Seminole communities scattered by war across North America and the West Indies. You'll find some, as it also says, on the Andros Island in the Bahamas, where their ancestors and ancestors escaped from Florida after the first Seminole War, went into the Bahamas. The Seminole freedmen, the largest group, live in rural Seminole County, Oklahoma. In this article, they say where they are still official members of the Seminole Indian Nation. But of course, a lot of things have gone down. Of course, the freedmen, you've read about some of the stories when they've talked about the freedmen and the so-called Native Americans went to court to make sure that these freedmen were not recognized as part of the tribe after over 100 years, because these quote-unquote tribes are now getting money and millions of dollars to build casinos and everything else, getting reparations from the government, and all of a sudden they were like, oh, by the way, you all who have been, Cherokee freedmen and Seminole freedmen and all this other stuff, you were really never Cherokee from the beginning. You have nothing to do with us, and you're not getting any of this money. And some of our people who were brainwashed were saying, well, no, we are Cherokee. And the Cherokee was saying, actually, you were just simply the slaves of some of our people. You were never Cherokee, even though we called you Cherokee freedmen. And now that we're getting this money, we're going to prove that, and we're going to court to show you are not Cherokee. So all the brainwashed Negroes running around talking about their Cherokee and everything else, and these crackers are proving to you that's not who you are, and you shouldn't have any desire to identify with those who are inferior to you anyway. Now, but you have some black Seminoles still in Oklahoma, in Seminole County. You have the Moscogos dwell in the dusty desert town of Nacimiento in the state of Coahuila in northern Mexico. They're still there. Finally, the Scouts live in Brackettville, Texas, outside the walls of the old fort where their grandfathers served in the U.S. cavalry. These groups have lost almost all contact with one another, but they have all retained the memory of their ancestors' fight for freedom in the Florida wilderness. And then they talk about, for example, in 1978, Dr. Ian Hancock discovered that elders among the Texas Scouts still speak a dialect of Gullah, 140 years after their ancestors were exiled from Florida, and as much as 200 years after their early ancestors escaped from rice plantations in South Carolina and Georgia. In 1980, the writer found that elderly people among the Oklahoma Seminole freedmen also speak Gullah, while many younger people remember words and phrases used once by their grandparents. But the Oklahoma and Texas groups, though deeply conscious of their Florida heritage, were unaware of their connection with the Gullah in South Carolina and Georgia. They did not know precisely where their ancestors had come from before fleeing into the Florida wilderness. The Oklahoma Seminole freedmen still possess a rich traditional culture combining, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit cultures, ethnic cultures, and so forth. They continue to eat rice as a characteristic part of their diet. Of course, many of them were from the rice, so-called rice coast. Sometimes applying the sauce of okra or spinach leaves like the Gullah and like their distant relatives in West Afuraitkaitnut. So, going back, we want to show that these were the Gullah Wars. When they talk about the Seminole Wars, now, of course, Seminole just means runaway or wild or untamed. We're talking about the black people who ran away. So instead of saying the Seminole or the wild, maroon, untamed, savage wars, what they should be calling them are the Gullah Wars. And the general who informed the War Department, as well as the congressman, saying this was a Negro war. He said, I assure you, this is not an Indian war. This is a Negro war, because they are the ones who are waging war. This is their settlement. This is their nation, and they're defending their nation with their lives. Over 50 years of fighting the U.S. government consistently and maintaining their freedom the entire time, even when they had to retreat further south into Florida or go to Oklahoma or go to Texas. But one thing for certain, they were going to be free. So these were the Gullah Wars, a group of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. This was Pan-Africanism in the true sense, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people coming together and waging war against the enemy. Now, when we talked about these different groups, we also talked about briefly the DNA aspect. We see some comments in the chat room. If you have a question or comment, of course, on the phone line, hit the number 1 so we can see your hand is raised. I see some comments in the chat room. Before I get to that, let me just mention this piece about the DNA section to knock some things out. We already talked about the different percentages of where the people came from in central Africa, parts of south and even east, as far as Madagascar and so forth. Small percentage, but still you're fine. So when you find, some of the very short-statured people, sometimes they're from central Africa, Afuraitkaitnut, sometimes they're from Madagascar. So, but with regard to the genetics, we already talked about the separation and the delineation between the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, the Gullah people as a collective, who were later called Seminoles by the whites in their offspring, and then the pseudo-Native American, the migrant Asian, often called Indian and so forth, the separation between those two cultures, those two groups. And just like we're separate today, and live separate today, but adjacent to one another, but do not typically intermix unless some of our people are brainwashed, we lived in the same fashion back then. But some of our people would like to think that we're all, we all have Indian in our family and all this other nonsense. So let's look at a quick snapshot when some DNA studies, admixture DNA studies were done from various different DNA companies, very popular DNA companies. So, for example, according to the DNA company 23andme.com, and you can go there, I think their test, admixture test is $99 and so forth for a DNA test, very popular. According to 23andme.com, the average African American is 75% sub-Saharan Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, 22% European, and only 0.6 so-called Native American. According to FamilyTreeDNA.com, the average African American is 72.95% or 73% sub-Saharan African, 22.83% European, and 1.7% so-called Native American. According to National Geographic Genographic Project, the average African American is 80% sub-Saharan African, 19% European, and 1% Native American. According to African DNA, another service in which it partners also with Family Tree DNA. The average African American is 79% sub-Saharan African, 19% European, and 2% Native American. So when you look at these averages in these various DNA companies, doing admixture tests, mitochondrial DNA as well as Y chromosomal DNA from the mother side as well as the father side, different genetic companies, taking samples from Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people all around the country, and they're not sharing their results. This particular article just decided, let's look at these various companies and see if they come up with the same results, because they're all independent and they do things differently from one another. Let's see what they come up with. And the average is around 80% of the DNA is Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit. Around 20%, 20% is pollution from the whites and their offspring, Western Eurasians. And on average, about 1% is pollution from the so-called pseudo-Native Americans. So that's very interesting. And many of our people have absolutely no Native American pollution, pseudo-Native American pollution at all. Some of our people have no European pollution at all. And then some of our people do. They'll have, a great-great-great-great-grandfather or grandmother who was raped by a white parasite and polluted the blood circle at that moment. And then the child was a mulatto. But then the mulatto child grows up. They marry a black person. Then they have children. And their child is a little bit darker brown than the mulatto. And then, that child grows up, marries a black person. And their child grows up and it looks like, a regular person. You would never suspect that there was some pollution a few generations back from one cracker. So, but that one cracker will, that pollution will show up in the Y chromosomal DNA, showing that there was some pollution somewhere along the line. That doesn't mean that the people are actually 20% of your body is European. That means there was pollution that came in and it shows up on the marker. But the vast majority of people in your family were never polluted. But that percentage of Native Americans, 0.6% according to one group, 1.7% in another group, 1% in another group, 2% in another genetic, organization. So on average, around 1%. So the vast majority of our people do not have this so-called "I got Indian in my family" nonsense. The only reason our people embrace that nonsense is because of self-hatred. They desire to want to identify with pale skin, perverse noses and thin lips, which is perverse, stringy dead hair, which is perverse, light skin, which is just an indication of deficiency, genetic mutation and deficiency, weakness. We wanted to identify that because we're brainwashed to have been brainwashed to believe that white is superior, worshiping a white fake God and everything else. So if anybody had a little bit lighter skin, we want to say, oh, I got Indian in my family. Ooh, I have this, ooh, I have that. That's self-hatred. Even if somebody had high, quote-unquote, high cheekbones, then Negroes would jump on that and say, oh, you must have some Indian in your family, which is insane. When you look at Afuraitkaitnut people, if you look at East Afuraitkaitnut people and West to Central, we have different types. Some people are tall and slender. You have people who, for example, Mindi-speaking people, they'll be taller and more slender in relationship to some Central Afuraitkaitnut people or West Afuraitkaitnut people. There are different phenotypes. There are different morphological characteristics. So some of our people jump on that. But when you actually have the evidence, then it's nothing people can say. Now it's starting to chip away at this ignorance that we've been perpetuating, powered by the whites and offspring for over 100 years. And it also goes to point to the reality of the fools who would like to identify themselves foolishly as Moors. And of course, we have our book, Moor means dead. So when you identify yourself as a Moor, you're calling yourself a dead individual, mentally dead and spiritually dead. It's an idiotic title. It's always been a derogatory title. It goes back to ancient Kemet, meant dead in ancient Kemet physically, for those people who actually died and who were spiritually disordered, discordant, wayward, deceased, criminal type deceased. Those are the mer or meru plural, and then the people who are socially dead, the slaves, the vassals, the wretched, the afflicted, called mer as well, slaves. So either way, socially dead or physically dead, that's what the term mer or Moor means. So when you identify yourself with that derogatory term, you're engaged in idiotic identification. So but those people have been utilizing that misinformation for over 100 years because people didn't scrutinize it. And most people simply dismissed them anyway. Nobody cares about any Moors. Nobody paid attention for the past 100 years because it was just nonsensical, even for the most brainwashed black person. When they would hear somebody saying, hey, we're all Moors, they knew that was idiotic and they just dismissed it out of hand. But because of the rise of the internet, like we talked about before, people have more access to social media to spread these idiotic doctrines. They didn't have that access and that capacity to spread these foolish doctrines in the past. They typically spread these foolish doctrines to people who are locked up, and they couldn't escape from listening to these fools. So this is where they would get this information about Islam and 5% nonsense and Moorishism and so forth, and Hebrewism. But then, now that you have, the internet and you have social media, now people are spreading this misinformation in a viral fashion. But at the same time, commensurate with that, or in common measure with that, you have people who are now scrutinizing this information and exposing it for the idiocy that it is. So all of these foolish doctrines they're imploding, as which they should, and we accelerate that imploding. We're destroying these doctrines. Hebrewism, 5%ism, Rastafarianism, pseudo-Hermeticism, and pseudo-esotericism, Moorishism, various forms of Islam, pseudo-esoteric and exoteric, various forms of Christianity, people trying to make Christianity esoteric and all this nonsense, Hinduism, Buddhism, trying to blacken up these things, Taoism, and all this other nonsense, pseudo-metaphysics, all of these things, and Masonry, pseudo-Masonic groups and, crafts and all this nonsense. All of our people who have been imitating the whites and offspring since we've been enslaved by them and trying to take on their foolish, idiotic doctrines and blackening these foolish doctrines up. Now that the information, now that there's, the internet and social media allows this nonsense to become viral, at the same time, people are now actually scrutinizing and exposing the idiocy of all these doctrines and destroying them. And we're, of course, going to accelerate the destruction of these foolish doctrines and stamp them out and exterminate them from the minds of our people for good. So this is what's happening, and now people are, finding out the truth. And all this information with regards to genetics and ancestral culture, and people returning to their ancestral culture and exposing the fallacy of all these doctrines, it's all taking place, and of course that's a good development. So we just need to bring that information up. So we have a call on the phone line. We have some comments in the chat room. We're going to take the call first. Okay, Michiamo on the phone line, number 5808. You had a question or comment?
Yeah, well, thank you for this topic. Boy, lots of interesting and good information. And the first is a comment and then a question. What you were talking about as far as this proven, almost non-existence of a genetic relationship between Africans in North America and the American Indians. You, me, and mostly everybody, I'm sure, listening on this call have heard these stories and tales before of people saying, oh, yeah, my great-great-grandmother was a Sioux or a Cherokee or whatever. And real quick, as a child, I even knew that just didn't make any sense. And when I was in elementary school, we used to have an international festival every year where the children were encouraged to dress in the traditional garb of their heritage. So I went to a mostly white school, so, the kids, they knew they dressed in their German lederhosen and the Swiss, whatever they wore in Switzerland, and whatever the traditional dress was for their European ancestors. And my mom knew to dress us in, African fabrics and African garb. We didn't know where we came from, but she knew to dress us the way she thought African people dressed traditionally. But my black schoolmates, all of them came dressed as so-called Indians. And they said, well, my mom said I'm more Indian than anything else, so, my mom said I got Indian in my family, so this is how, she told me to dress. And even as a child, I thought, it's ridiculous. It just makes no sense.
Right.
So, I'm glad that the science proves it, even though I knew it in my heart that it was just wrong. So I'm glad that you took the time to analyze all of these independent scientific, all this independent data that shows there's very little genetic connection. But the question, since you're mentioning this, I also have a similar question about Egypt. Just like, they say the American Indians have been wiped out, we don't even know who they are anymore. When we hear Egypt now, and even I sometimes default to this, a lot of us first image we think of is Arabs. Where are the indigenous black commitments? I understand, and I've heard that, the people who are the Akhans of Ghana and the Ivory Coast are those who left Egypt and settled west. I think you've talked about that before. So are they all gone? Have they all been killed off? Are there any black people in Egypt? And how can we make a connection then between ourselves when all we know today and all we see today are the Arabs and the other mixtures from Europe and Asia that are dominating in Egypt now?
Okay, so what's happened is when the Arabs invaded, as well as even prior to that, like when the Assyrians invaded, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then the Arabs, and so forth. Even after the Assyrian invasion, then you start having people moving further south, like the Assyrian invasion. for example, Tanut Aman or Tanut Amini, going back further south, the Kushite, so-called Kushite Akash dynasty was ruling, but then the Assyrians forced them out of northern Kemet and so forth. They went further back into Khanit or Nubia and continued to rule for, the next 1,000 years and so forth. Then the Persians and then the Greeks and Romans. But then some of our people start migrating west. Mm-hmm. Some of them remained south. Some of them continued in southern Kemet, as well as in so-called Nubia, Khanit, the Napata Empire, the capital there in Napata, and then even going further to into Meroe and reestablishing the capital in Meroe further down, and Meroe lasts all the way up until the so-called 4th century AD. But then even continuing, even though some of the Europeans invaded certain areas and they started trying to force Christianity, our people were still living in those areas all the way up into the 1800s and even into today. You have black people in the south of Kemet today around the Aswan region, descendants of people, the actual descendants of, the ancient Kamal and so forth, still living there in the south today. The Arabs are in control, but, black people are living in the south. The ones who remain. Some of the ones who remain moved further south into so-called Nubia or Khanit. Then you have many who migrated west. And those who migrated west ended up into, Chad and what is now Chad and Niger, and eventually, West Afuraitkaitnut. Some of us reestablished the empire of Khanit, Nubia, or Ghana. And, some of us, of course, the Akan left Ghana, ancient Akana, moved further south and reestablished Akan civilization in the forest. But you'll find the people, the Mindi-speaking people, and the Bakongo and the Igbo and the Ebe and Fon and Ya and so forth. All these various groups talk about their traditions of coming directly from ancient Khanit and Kemet, ancient Nubia and Egypt and so forth. That's part of the culture. You see that in the language, of course. The languages are directly derived from the ancient language. But then you also see the genetic studies that prove that conclusively. So you'll see, for example, a number of years ago, when they did genetic studies on Tutankhamun as well as Ramesu III, they found that the Y haplogroup E1B1A that Ramesu III carries, you'll find that it clusters at its greatest frequency in the western part of Afuraitkaitnut. You find that same Y chromosomal haplogroup is found within 50 to 75% of all black people in America. And when you look at the pattern, when you look at the migratory route of that E1B1A haplogroup from ancient Kemet through northwest Afuraitkaitnut all the way to west Afuraitkaitnut, and you see that it clusters at its greatest frequency in the western part of the continent, and then it goes down to the forest belt, and then from the forest belt, it goes directly into North America. You'll find the same exact migratory pattern, for example, of the Akan people, as well as others migrating across, northwest Afuraitkaitnut to the western part of the continent, establishing civilization there, some moving towards the forest belt, and some getting caught up and forced into the Western Hemisphere. So not only do we find the genetics that bear that out, that simply confirms and just repeats, enunciates what we have been talking about with regard to our oral traditions in the various groups on the continent, as well as the spiritual traditions. We're still dealing with the exact same deity by the same names. They still possess us. They still communicate with us. They still show themselves to us and still speak that same language. This is why you can take a Akan dictionary, you can take a Yoruba dictionary, you can take a Congo dictionary, you can take a Fon or Ebe dictionary and line them up with a hieroglyphic dictionary and find the same words with the same meaning, multi-layered meaning, with the same spiritual concepts intact and unchanged for thousands of years. And then you also find those same words in the same traditions in the Western Hemisphere where we still practice the ancestral religion. So, for example, you'll find, like when we talk about our book Hoodoo, talking about Hoodoo, of course that term means root work and, root doctor, root medicine and so forth, but it also means conjure, and you'll find, of course, that it has those same meanings in the Akan tradition, including the spiritualist, the Odwirafo, the Odu person who makes medicine, and also is a conjurer. And you'll find Udu also dealing with root medicine, as well as conjuring spirits in the language of ancient Kemet, and Khanit, to the extent that even the territory of ancient Khanit is also called the Udu land, and the people are called the Udu people. So it's the exact same term with the exact same meaning, ritual functions from East Afuraitkaitnut to West, all the way into North America to this moment right today.
Yes, and isn't there a phonetic connection or semantic connection between Inyame, Nyamewa, and Amen and Amenet, the AME? Is that just coincidence, or is that just a carryover from the original language?
No, in fact, it is. We actually wrote an article about that. It's called The Origin of the Name Inyame in Kemet. And there's a title of Inyame called Ari Ame, and the symbol is the I, which is Ari. Spelled A-R-I or A-N-I in the Medusa, but Ari means I, just like Eni means I in Akan. And you see the I, and then you see Amen, and it's Ariame. And Ariame becomes Aniame in Akan. It becomes Anjambe and East Afurakan, Nyambi amongst the Losi people. In South Afuraitkaitnut, it becomes Nzambi. In the Congo tradition, it's Nyame, of course, in Akan. And from east to central to south to west Afuraitkaitnut, you'll find various variations of Ariame, Aniame, Njambe, Nyambe, Nzambi. You find it all across the board. So it's the exact same divinity. It has absolutely, by the way, nothing to do with Yahweh. That's totally idiotic and nonsense. Some Europeans started promoting that foolish idea a number of years back with Hebrewisms in West Africa. And then, other black people who've been writing, looking at that misinformation, they've repeated that foolish doctrine because they don't really understand who these divinities are. We still actually invoke these divinities and communicate directly with them, but we also prove, linguistically as well as cosmologically that Ariame from ancient Kemet is Aniame and Nzambe in Akan and in the Bakongo tradition.
Okay, yes, we need to continue to expose and promote the connection, because there is a faction that believes that the focus on Kemet is an attempt to disassociate from Black Africa from Sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to continue to make these connections.
Absolutely.
So may I say?
Okay, Yenya say that. We appreciate the call. Okay, I just want to look in the chat room right quick. I saw we had some comments there. Scroll through and make sure there weren't any questions in that section. Okay. And we see some comments. We just want to go through this real quick. Okay, so there's a comment here in New Orleans. There's a large number of African Americans that claim the culture and celebrate this claim as Indians several times a year. I don't think they claim themselves as Black Seminoles. Are you familiar with them? Yeah, so you'll see some people jump on that. You know what I'm saying? Now, you have some people who, in the past married into those families. You have that 1% that actually did that. Some of our people, of course, are brainwashed, so they still want to identify with these individuals. When you see these pseudo-Native Americans engage in these ritual practices, and they're talking about Mother Earth and everything else, that has nothing to do with their culture, just like it has nothing to do with the culture of white Hispanics who decide to, try to invade the Yoruba tradition, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, they have Yoruba names, and they're pouring libation and utilizing the Yoruba language and wearing traditional Yoruba clothes and so forth. They invaded that culture. Now, of course, the Orisha do not communicate with them at all. and the Egungun do not communicate with them at all. But they're trying to invade the culture and pretend as though they're part of it. Just like these white Hispanics are doing that today, they did the same thing back then. They didn't have an ancestral religion before they came in contact with our people. So when they're talking about Mother Earth and all these different things and having medicine wheels and all of that, that's nothing more than the same Dikinga, the Bakongo cosmogram, and the other cosmograms that Afuraitkaitnut people were using, Bebes and everything else. And they're talking about the spirits and nature and so forth. That has nothing to do with any pseudo-Native American. They have no connection to any forces in nature at all. They learned about these things by coming in contact with our people. First, of course, thousands of years ago when our people came to this region, built pyramids and everything else, when the Asians first invaded, they did the same thing they did in ancient Kemet. When the Greeks and others invaded, or when, pseudo-Semitic people, invade, they were being crushed militarily, but they were trying to infiltrate and imitate our culture and dress like us and so forth. When the Greeks invade, they began to dress like the people of Kemet. They wear the same clothes. They try to build temples and make the deities look like themselves and everything else. They try to imitate our culture and simply whiten up the deities and keep going in that fashion, and then begin to introduce dissexuality, homosexuality, their perverse nature. In the same fashion, thousands of years ago, when the white Asians invaded this hemisphere, came in contact with us, they waged war against us. We've been at war with them for thousands of years. Of course, some of them, when they're losing these wars, they begin to try to imitate our people. So this whole notion of wearing these feathers and these beads and talking about the Earth Mother and everything else, that comes from them having invaded and imitating our culture. It has nothing to do with them. Even in the so-called Near East, even in ancient China, Afuraitkaitnut scholars who talked about the African presence in China and everything else. Going back, and even some of the Chinese archaeologists will talk about the Shang dynasty being a, quote-unquote Negroid dynasty, or the founding dynasty was an African dynasty in Asia, and sets the standard for civilization in China, the Shang dynasty. And even before that, the, Fu Hasi, or the divine dynasties in ancient China. Before the Chao and the Han people come along, the Shang people were there. So they were learning about ancestral culture and ancestral religion from imitating our people, not because they had some ancestral religion. So some of those people go up into Siberia. And, so even before the Shang dynasty, our people being in those areas in southern China, in the so-called Near East, of course in southern Europe, our people are all over these places. When the whites and our offspring come into being, they come in contact with us. They imitate what we are doing because they don't have a culture. They don't have any connection to, nature. They don't have any connection to the Earth Mother. They don't have any connection to any of that. They're not using feathers. They're not using beads. They're not using any of that until they come in contact with our people in southern Europe, in the Near East, in southern Asia, and so forth. And then they begin to imitate what we're doing, and they continue that. And even the ones who leave the so-called Near East, some of those who leave Siberia and come into the Western Hemisphere, and, thousands of years ago, we were already here. So they come in contact with us. Some of them had already been imitating some of our people when they were in China and brought some of that imitation over here, but then they came in contact with us again. They're imitating our people again. So the same thing happens, thousands of years later in New Orleans. People are imitating the whites and their offspring who were imitating our people, which is nonsensical. And the reason our people get all dressed up and imitating the whites and their offspring, pseudo-Native Americans, because our people are still enamored with light skin and straight hair. They're not repelling that perversity. They're trying to embrace it and trying to pretend like, oh, we're the same people, which we are not. As we talked about before, you can mix blood, but you cannot mix the soul. You cannot mix the okrawa. So even if somebody's blood is polluted and there's copulation interracially, the spirit that enters that womb is either a spirit from the Afurakani or Afuraitkaitnit side returning into that womb, or it's one of those crackers coming back through their womb. When they come back, the little body that they enter into is going to be light brown because of the mixture. But depending on where that spirit comes from, the provenance of that spirit, if it's an Afurakani ancestor or an Afuraitkaitnit ancestress, then it may be operating through a lighter brown body, but it's still an Afurakani or Afuraitkaitnit spirit and should be embracing ancestral culture. If it's one of those cracker spirits, then it's going to be a cracker spirit that grows up and begins to pollute and trying to lull our people to sleep and lure us into embracing them, spirits of disorder. And when we begin to embrace spirits of disorder, we endear ourselves to spirits of disorder, then we begin to accept their perverse culture. And then when some of our people come along and say we need to embrace our own culture, these Negroes will be the first ones to defend the white Seminole Spring, and they'll say, well, if you don't accept the white Seminole Spring, then I don't want to have anything to do with you. So they will cut themselves off from the entire black population in order to defend the white Seminole Spring, our actual enemy, because they have been endeared like a slave, like a drug addict to these, crackers. So that's the purpose of them infiltrating, to endear us. When they endear some of our people in a brainwashed fashion, then we will seek to defend them and perpetuate their existence. And their existence is all about trying to control and dominate our people. So as long as you're defending their existence and defending their quote-unquote right to be part of the family, which they are not, then you are helping them to perpetuate their existence and exercise their dominance over our people, which is insane. So some of our people are engaged in that nonsense. But bottom line is, they are not us, and we are not them. They never will be us. We will never be them, and we should have no desire whatsoever to be there. And also, with regard to the genetic piece, many of our people, they'll simply say, hey, our grandmother or great-grandmother or great-grandfather was, some Blackfoot or something like that. And they'll say, why? Because, she had long black hair and she had high cheekbones and her nose was a hook nose and all of this. And the only reason they have that is because they were polluted by one of the whites in offspring during enslavement, and they come out looking like, Halle Berry or something like that. Halle Berry is not, she's not tan, light, instead of being dark brown and fully, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, she has that palish look with that weak hair, not because, she was, quote-unquote, have Indian in her family. She had a white parent. But a Negro looking at her would say, oh, she must have Indian in her family. Then the lore and the family is, oh, my great-grandmother named Hallie, she was Native American. No, she just had a cracker who was a parent, a cracker who polluted the blood circle. She came out light brown, and Negroes who want to identify with so-called Native Americans start calling her that because she looks kind of the similar complexion as them, and her hair is kind of straight like theirs, and then that becomes the myth in the family. And, of course, Negroes will want to embrace that and identify with it because they want to say they have, quote-unquote, good hair, which is insane, and it becomes part of the family. But, again, when you look at the actual fact, on average, the average black person in America, about 1%, quote-unquote, Native American ancestors, meaning there are millions of black people who have none whatsoever at all. And these myths in the family, if they have any pollution, it was coming from the whites and offspring. But either way, whether it was pollution from the Western Eurasian or the Eastern Eurasian, it's still pollution, so it's nothing to be proud of in either sense. They're all the same. They're all perverse. All right. So let me have a question on the phone line. Okay, number 5466, Michio, on the phone line. You had a question or a comment?
Greetings, brother. How you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
Hello? Hey, I
yes,
got two for you. I'm in a comprehensive situation. You mind if I paint a picture for you? Number one, I say I agree with you 100%, but I got some people that I'm going to have to argue that point with. You mind if I paint a comprehensive picture for you real quick?
Yeah, no, go ahead. You can do it.
All right, so this is what I'm looking at, and I'm going to put myself in it, and I'm going to give you exactly what I'm looking at. The first point I would say is I agree with you because I see it in the sense of space and time migrations. And this is where I'll put myself in the picture. Like, I've been looking since the late 90s because, once again, just like you said, I'm one of them brothers who had family that said flat out, you know, I'm Choctaw Indian. I know my great-grandmother, right? So when DNA became available, I done put like over $1,000 into trying to figure this out. And, you know, for me, I know who I am. I know where my roots started. You don't give up a continent, the mother continent, for what they're trying to give up. I would never do that. I know where my cross springs from. I wouldn't do that. So basically for me, I just wanted to know where it came from. So I looked on my father's side. On my father's side, I got EM2, which is Akan, and I have EU174, which is Ga. And on my mother's side, I have and this is what it says. This is what, you know, National Geographic Family Tree says. L1C2, which actually has 4 roots, one in Spain, and the other ones they're attributing directly to the United States Native American. And then I have on my mother's side as well, L1C2B1B, which is attributed to Cameroon. Now, I'm telling you that to go back into my other point, which was this. What I realized when I did other tests, there's a time element that these DNA tests don't do, or they don't give us the full time pacing of. So I look back 30,000 years, and it's saying that I have roots in Kenya. This is what National Geographic said. And then I also look, the same roots from Kenya, they look a little closer, like I'm saying here, they're seeing those Akan and those Ga roots in Western. And then Ancestry.com, same thing, Western Africa. So obviously there's a time element there. And so this gets to the second part of this, the part that when I talk to brothers of a certain orientation, you have to argue with. They talk about the Folsom people, which they say became native to this continent 16,000 years ago, or they talk about the Amaruka people, which supposedly were on the islands. Can't prove that, so I say supposedly. Or they talk about the Olmec people, which obviously resembled us. They had the hair. They left stone monuments to know that they were there. The Olmec She people, the pyramids of Teotihuacan, which they'll try to compare to the pyramids of Kemet. So obviously there's a time factor. My general answer for them, and maybe you could throw me a bone and maybe help me out with this, is that obviously we were the first everywhere. You know, I have no problem saying that, but, you know, so where would you draw these time and space factors to say, you know, when these things happen? We talk about the Shang dynasty versus the deviant, which is what I call the deviant people, or like the lady was talking about the Egyptians. Like, take for example, just to throw you one more, how they talk about the original people that inhabited Macedonia. Matter of fact, I was actually looking at Diodorus Siculus' history, talking about how Wasir, I believe it was either Wasir, I think it was Wasir, who actually, or one of his sons, that created Macedon in Diodorus Siculus' history. So there's a time element here. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying. There's spatial migrations that people admit to readily, but the question that I don't think a lot of people are getting to is the time. Obviously we were in these places, and maybe we left, or maybe, like you said, continue with deviant practices, and they became what they became. But I'll stop there, and I'll let you go ahead, brother.
But and it's true. The bottom line is people are looking for excuses not to identify with Afuraitkai. So they will twist DNA and so forth to make things fit their agenda, their narrative. Yes, we originate on the continent, of course, and then we migrated to Southern Europe and Asia and into North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean before any other race existed on Earth. Because even when they're talking about the DNA studies now, which we've already, just in our own culture, we've understood this, but they'll talk about the specific gene that causes the shift from color from black to, pale and so forth. not existing before 10,000 years ago. According to them, these are their newest discoveries. So they'll put the time frame to around between 6,000 and 12,000 years at the earliest 12,000 years. At the latest 6,000 years, they say around 8,000 years ago is when light-skinned people showed up in Europe. Prior to that, they were saying it was about 20,000 years ago, simply because they found people with different morphological characteristics in Europe after the end of the last ice age. So they were like, well, people must have developed around 20,000 years ago, 20 to 25,000 years ago. But once they found this, the quote-unquote color gene, now they had to move it up because of the DNA and the human genome and so forth. And now they find that there were no white-skinned people walking around prior, definitely not before 12,000 years ago. So any group of people, for example, if they're talking about the Folsom people and so forth, and they're talking about 16,000 years ago and everything else, if it was earlier than 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 years ago, then there were no
These were dark-skinned people. They were dark-skinned.
Right. So, and we migrated there. We didn't, Negroes would like to say they originated in South America and all other nonsense, knowing clearly that archaeologically as well as genetically, that's not borne out anywhere. They're just trying to figure out a way to not be from Afuraitkaitnut because they hate themselves. So they want to find, an origin in Asia or mythological continents that never existed, or South America because they've been conditioned to hate themselves. But the reality is, it's very simple. We migrated to different parts of the world and we established civilization. We came over here and we established civilization. The pyramids in, Mexico, going back about 3,000 years ago. There's information, evidence, of course, showing that this was an ancient civilization from Kemet, with the same iconography, with the same dress, with the same libation, bowls and everything else. So it's clear that our people simply migrated over here and perpetuated our culture. What happened after that, though, which is very important, we talked about a few broadcasts back, just like there was the Black Death, quote unquote, in Europe in the 1300s. And within 5 years, between one-third and one-half of all of Europe was wiped out by the plague. And that devastated Europe for a while. It took them a few centuries to come back from the plague. Thousands of people dying in the street. Half the population gone because of the plague in 5 years. And then the aftermath of that 5 years of the disease and everything else, people were suffering, so it took them a while to get back. And then once they get back a few hundred years later, then they get hit with from the 16th century to the 19th century, you had the Barbary Coast slave trade where white, Arab, Muslims, as well as some of the brainwashed blacks who become Muslims, were enslaving white Christians for 300 years throughout North Africa and into the Mediterranean. So that was happening there. But here in the Western Hemisphere, the plague hit the Western Hemisphere as well and wiped out millions of people, whole villages of people being wiped out by the plague, to the extent that when the Spanish were coming, and they were coming into certain villages and whole villages were depopulated. And they were trying to figure out what happened. And then some of their domesticated animals like the pigs and so forth that they brought over here, they were carriers of disease, and those pigs would go out into the areas, and they were, the people were not ready and couldn't handle such a viral, epidemic because it spread like wildfire. That was in the Northern America as well as Central America and the Caribbean as well. So the people who were here prior to, the Spanish coming and everything else, once that came through and once those plagues hit quote-unquote, ancient America, they wiped out millions and millions of people. This is why they started to bring Afuraitkaitnut people from the continent to be enslaved. It wasn't simply because, the Native Americans are too weak to do the, work. That was part of it. But the people were devastated. The populations were devastated. There were millions of people who died from the plague, bodies piling up, thousands of bodies, villages wiped out, men, women, and children.
Yeah, they admitted to that. I remember that's one thing I remember from elementary school is they told us that when those Europeans came over here, they brought disease and thousands of people died behind that.
Right. They brought that plague that, people didn't have any immunity for it. So that preceded them. It wasn't that they just had some wonderful military and they were so powerful. That disease came, preceded them and took people out before they could even get to the people. And then people are dying or already dead by the time they get to the village, and then they take over the village and say, hey, we conquered America. But it was that disease. So when you have these individuals talking about, we were already here and they didn't bring any slaves from Africa, the people were wiped out. So they had to bring people over here, as far as they were concerned, bring people over here to, work as enslaved people over here for the economy and so forth. So this basic trustery, knocks out all these silly claims of people trying to figure out all kinds of machinations to place themselves, their origins anywhere outside of the continent.
It makes me wonder, because I've heard different things. What happened 8,000 years ago?
You mean as far as the switch?
Yes.
As far as the genetically? So, but it's still, the 8,000 years ago is still correlated with our people migrating up. Some of our people migrate up into northern Eurasia, and some of those people getting caught up at the, in the Ice Age, and at the end of the last Ice Age, they're being able to move around, get back towards southern Europe. But the key is that when you're isolated like that, and plus just their behavior in and of themselves, incest greatly increases the incidence of albinism, and it also increases the incidence of degenerative diseases such as vitiligo is an autoimmune disease. So somebody has a white spot and begins to spread, and that autoimmune disease affects them to the extent that it strips the pigmentation from them. And those kind of things, even today, they don't have a remedy for vitiligo. They just know it's an autoimmune disease, and they try to do different things, but typically they can't do anything to stop it. But incest greatly increases the incidence of albinism, as well as, these inherited immune deficiencies. Of course, the whites and their offspring, they were engaged in incest, of course, bisexuality, with incest and everything else. They were engaged in that. That's why they were, forced out of our communities in the first place, because of the criminality that they were engaged in: murder, rape, incest, bisexuality, that kind of thing. Anything deviant, we would typically kill those kind of individuals, except for the ones who escaped that death sentence. And they continue to engage in incest. And, of course, that's borne out through their culture now. They're child molesters that's enshrined within their culture, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Judaism. You'll find, the men and the boys, they're always molesting the boys, and that's part of their culture. That's always been a part of their culture. So sexual deviance is horrible. So that's the major key to that degeneration. It's not simply the climate. If it was simply the climate that would strip somebody and make them melanin recessive, then you would not have had, number one, certain Asians still living up, the Inuit and Eskimos, the Inuit up in, Alaska, still having black hair and some melanin content and so forth after thousands of years of living in the snow, as well as the fact, more importantly, that the Inuit and other people in the Arctic and so forth, when they talk about their oral traditions, they'll say when they arrived there were small black people who were there who preceded them, meaning that those small black people living up in the Arctic still had color. So it's not simply the climate and the diet. The climate and the diet will cause problems. It will cause morphological, characteristics beginning to change. And they talk, not only melanin D deficiencies and all that other stuff, but bone structure and everything else becoming, deformed because of deficiencies, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, living without sun and everything else. That changes the morphological characteristics. It was not an adaptation. Some people would like to say, well, dark skin was a liability in a cold climate. That's nonsense. Again, you have Negroes trying to ingratiate themselves to the whites and their offspring in pseudo-scientific white community. They don't want to come out and say black is superior, so they'll say, actually, dark skin was a liability, so all we did was adapt. So we're not saying that white is inferior. We're just saying that it was an adaptation. That's all nonsense. They still fear the whites and their offspring. They're trying to ingratiate themselves. The crackers don't care anything about what you're saying anyway. So just tell the truth. White skin is a deficiency. It's inferior. It's not natural. And their morphological structure is not natural. But so when you migrate and you're cut off from the sun and cut off from kind of nutrients that you actually need, then you become deformed. Your bones become deformed, your facial structure becomes deformed, your hair becomes weak and flat, and everything else.
You know what's funny?
Oh, go ahead.
You know what's funny is we still watching the same thing play out on the world stage. The same thing that made them what they are. Like you said, these are not dominant traits. These are recessive phenotypes and genotypes. And you already know. There's no mystery. You can Google countries with negative population growth, and I think 7 of them are European countries. One of them is China. You got probably one African anomaly or something like that, but the general. And then you also looking how in Australia they done moved their silly butts back into the caves. I could not make this up. Oh, yeah. So it's this is what's happening now. They're doing the same things, and at the same time, like you said, you have, Afurakanu. I can't pronounce it right, so I'm not going to try. We got our African brothers and sisters out here trying to ingratiate themselves to these people. And, if they only knew their history, not only were the white Christians being enslaved in the 1900s, something that I found out more recently is about the white Arab slave trade was in 1250, the Mamelukes, and how the white people there were being enslaved by the Arabs. And then the lesson behind both of those is they had to fight to get their butts out of that slavery, regardless, because they say the Mamelukes were the military of the Arabs or whatever. I don't care how cool it was still slavery. And people act like we just gonna march our way out of this and we gonna, vegetarian our way out of this. We got some work to do. And I don't know. That's all I say is, if you study the history, you can watch it playing out on the world stage. And I think maybe if we give the world enough time, nature will take care of it because they can't reproduce properly. That's why they have to take fertility and ovulation drugs, while on the other side, they got us practicing birth control and contraception. You see? So they got us having less children while they having to take, drugs to have more kids. So they're fighting a losing battle genetically anyway, but if they blow us up on the way there, you know what I'm saying, we still lost the battle. Do I think it's an option? I don't think they can do it. I already know. They draw these geopolitical lines between us. We had tribal lines, which is where they exploited us to begin with. You already know the history, brother, the true story. But they done took them tribal lines and threw in political structures. So now you got... Hold on one second.
I just want to announce for the people, there's a minute left in the broadcast as far as online. If you want to stay on to listen beyond 11 o'clock, you must call in within the next minute. The call-in number is 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635. You have to call in within the next half a minute so you can get on the phone line before 11 o'clock because it'll cut off at 11 o'clock so the people who are on the phone can still listen. So 657-383-0635. Okay, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure you get my point, man. Just airing out more than anything. I know you probably know about all these. We just got some work to do, man. And nature's on our side, but if we keep playing pity-pat on this, I don't know how secure this, we are in this situation,
Well, definitely. Nature's on our side in the sense that, yes, the population growth is negative, and it's been that way for over a generation for the whites in offspring. So every year, more of them are dying than being born. That's true in America, of course, it's true in Europe. The anomaly with regards to, you have a couple of African nations who are following the dictates of some of these, programs the whites and their offspring place upon them, trying to, force, contraception and everything. One of the first bills that Obama signed into law when he became president was to authorize, abortion clinics to be set up all across Afuraitkaitnut. So, of course, this cracker operating as a Negro is setting up, the murder of Afuraitkaitnut baby, the genocide of our people. But, we have the highest birth rate, even with all the famines and the wars and everything on the continent. On the continent, we have the highest birth rate in the world, whereas the whites and our offspring, with all of the wealth and so forth, they are at negative population growth. So the key is, yes, if, we just let things go, then nature would take care of them, except they're not going to let things go, so they're going to try to murder as many of our people as possible, increase our death rate, decrease our birth rate, increase our incarceration rate, increase our drug addiction rate, and, of course, increase our, spiritual addiction rate to these pseudo-religions, increase the practice of dissexuality, homosexuality, to shut us down as much as possible. So we must wage war against them culturally as well as physically, warfare with metal armaments, chemical and biological warfare, and every other armament, every other approach that they use against us to take us out. We must defend ourselves against our enemies on every level, because if it's like cancer, you can't just let cancer go and then it's going to take care of itself. You have to meet it head on and eradicate. So we must exterminate them. And there's no repairing them. They must be exterminated, consciously focused on to be exterminated. So that's the only thing.
I agree 100%. So, you could put me back on mute. You probably got other calls, man, but that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Medase, we appreciate the call.
Peace, brother.
Okay, so we have a couple more calls. And again, for the individuals who came in a little bit later, if you look on the Akan Economic Development page, the business of the week for this week is Kamali Academy, owned by Dr. Samori Kamara. So you can go to the website, go to the Akwamu site, Starve the Beast and Feed the Prize, support that business. And we're going to add that link, of course, on the Facebook page later tonight as well. But when you go to the Akwamu Economic Development page, you'll see that link there. All right. So on the phone line, the GRO number 1613. You had a question or a comment? Number 1613. Okay. Couldn't hear on that one. We're going to go to number 5251 on the phone line. You had a question or a comment?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Is my voice clear? Okay, my voice is clear. Okay. Hi, Michamo. I wanted to ask you a question about, I think it was Peter the Doctor you said on one of your broadcasts on the independent African nations in the West. Now, you were saying that he gave his followers some type of, I guess herbal medicine or something to make them bulletproof or something like that. Now, I wanted to ask you, was that some type of placebo effect, or were they literally bulletproof? Because I talk to a lot of people from like Africa and the Caribbean, and they tell me all these stories. People, they wearing talismans, and then somebody try to stab them, and the knife breaks, or they're bulletproof or knife proof. So I wanted to ask you, are these people? Is this literal, or is that even possible? Like if you would. Because on your broadcast you didn't go into detail on this. So I was just curious. You said Peter the Doctor was using medicine or whatever to make his followers feel invincible, or were they actually invincible, or is that some type of placebo effect to get them courage? So I just wanted to ask that.
Okay, so now. There are two things. In fact, you kind of have both answers in the question. On one hand, some people do give people medicine. It empowers them, emboldens them. They're fired up. They become fearless, and nothing will stop them. And they will just move forward, and they don't care what happens. They have no fear. But then you also have individuals like you talked about. You hear individuals talk about whether it's in the Caribbean or on the continent, sometimes amongst people in North America, depending on who's engaged in ritual practice. Very often most of our people have left a lot of that alone, but then you have some people who still practice hoodoo. You have some people who still practice juju and things like that, and they will talk about those same things as well. It's just not as frequent as you would find on the continent in the Caribbean, where people are still more openly practicing things than they are here. But somebody can, it's not that the medicine in and of itself makes the skin like impervious to any kind of comfort. You do have certain medicines or certain ritual practices that can strengthen your aura to the extent, just like somebody who's a martial artist. The average person can't, break 4 or 5 boards with their head or something like that. But when somebody, develops their life force energy and makes it more strong and vibrant, then they intensify that electromagnetic energy, and then they can, break a board because they're channeling that energy. So you can do things like that to a certain extent, but that's not the only thing that's happening with somebody. For example, they get stabbed and knife breaks and they're not able to stab the person. What those individuals typically are working with is a spirit, whether it's a harmonious spirit or a disharmonious spirit that's working with the individual. So they'll end up running interference and breaking the knife or making the bullet or making the sword veer off and break or do whatever. So just like you can, for example, just physically, if you have a magnet, like we always talk about on the tables, and the 2 polarities facing, same polarities facing, and you push one near the other one, and you can push it out the way without touching it because of the magnetic field. In the same fashion, this kind of spirits can move things around. They move things around the house. They can move people. If they can possess a person and move a person around, or they can pick up and knock a glass off the table, and people say, well, there's a spirit, knock the glass off the table, same thing. They can do the same thing with different, items, whether it's a knife, whether it's a bullet, whatever it is. And in the spirit realm, they move faster than we do in the physical realm. So they can make things veer off just electromagnetically. They can put a stop to certain things. They can make things happen. So it's not that the medicine itself, like making the skin as hard as steel, the electromagnetic energy of the person in connection with some discarnate spirit working along with them is, running interference for them, and that's what's really taking place. If people are really working with something. Very often people really aren't. They're just making things up. But sometimes you do have people who are really working with a discarnate spirit.
Oh, okay. That's really okay. That clarifies my question, Midasi.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say that. Okay. So we have some questions, or maybe some questions in the chat room. Just want to make sure. And as sometimes when we go through the chat room, it doesn't scroll down uniformly. It jumps back and forth, so sometimes it causes us to miss some of the dialogue. So we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay. All right, so it doesn't, there's one question. Is this connected to the bomb dropped on Tulsa, Oklahoma? Was it a designated strike, Black Wall Street? On Black Wall Street, definitely. It was, they saw that the black people they developed their own community. They developed their own economy. They had businesses, they had banks, they had insurance companies, they had grocery stores, they had a number of different businesses, and they were thriving. The whites in offspring didn't like the fact that they were thriving. One thing that they had not developed was a militia. They had churches as well, but they didn't develop a militia. Like some of our other people who established independent communities recognized the reality that anything that they established, the whites in offspring are cancerous cells. They are parasites, and they are going to seek to destroy anything that we establish. That is their ill nature. So you never should be foolish enough to think that just because you stay away from them, then they're going to stay away from you. Cancerous cells don't just stay away from the other side. In nature, they are cancerous, and that's why they seek to consume and destroy and create disorder in their path until they are exterminated. So whenever you establish a community, you must at the same time establish a military structure to defend that community, because you know the enemy will seek to destroy whatever you build. So that must be part of, that's why that's the third principle of nation building, Amansesew restoration. So what they didn't have was a formidable militia. They did have churches and they prayed and so forth, but they didn't, to the fictional God and so forth, but they did not have a militia. The whites and their offspring came against them, sent their, posses against them, but then they also dropped bombs on them. They wanted to destroy everything they had. They wanted to show the black people that as long as we're around, you're not going to be in control. Now, of course, there are other black groups who established independent communities and they armed themselves. And any cracker would come along, the cracker was going to be shot to death. And when they knew they would come across those kind of Afurakani and Afuraitkaitnit people, they don't mess with those groups. And they don't write about them and they don't talk about them. They try to pretend as though they don't exist. And as long as they weren't writing about them and broadcasting about them and publishing about them, then people wouldn't know those communities existed. Even when you talk about the Gullah Wars and so forth, very often you look in different documents and you'll see that where they should have had the line for black or quote-unquote Negro or colored army or Gullah and so forth, they would leave it blank. In certain newspaper clippings, they would leave certain things blank or leave certain things out because they didn't want the larger community of whites to know what was really taking place. The brother asked about Peter the Doctor, and they were talking about the conspiracy with Denmark Vesey and some of the others. You'll find that in the court documents, when they found out that there was a contingency plan, that if the revolt didn't go down, their contingency plan was they were going to poison the water supply in the entire city and wipe out everybody. That struck such fear in the heart of the whites and their offspring that they decided not to publish that accurate information as part of the court record. They wanted to keep that out of the public view because they didn't want the public to be alarmed to recognize that there was such a widely organized plan and a contingency plan to exterminate all of the whites and their offspring, men, women, and babies. And they didn't want to remind black people that this was, an option. They wanted to keep those kinds of things out of the minds of the people. Even today, when we hear about these things, we're shocked, like, wow, we didn't know they were thinking like that. It's the same thing going back then. There were certain black communities who existed independently, and they lived that way independently after they escaped from enslavement and throughout until enslavement was over. They were independent intergenerationally. They were the kind of communities that would massacre any of the whites who would come and try to take them out. So the whites and their offspring would stay away from them because they know that if they came, they would get killed. They would stay away from them, and then they would not broadcast or publish anything about them, and hopefully these people would die out and so forth, and nobody would know that there were a bunch of independent black towns, black settlements, black villages who were defending themselves and so forth. They didn't want to let other black people know that there were successful black settlements in different parts of the country, because then we would get the idea, well, maybe we can do the exact same thing. So this is what they were doing. But with Black Wall Street, they went on the attack. They destroyed the communities. We didn't have a militia in that particular settlement, so the whites and offspring were able to gain the upper hand. Simply emboldens the rest of us to recognize anything that we establish, we must defend, because these parasites, as long as they exist on Earth, they are parasites. And until they're exterminated, they will never stop operating as parasites operate, and that is without exception. Okay, so just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else. Okay, so we have one more call on the phone line. Okay, Michelle, number 2081. You had a question or a comment on the phone line?
Yeah. What's up, Kwesi?
What's up?
My question, I know you had a guest on EGUA Marketplace. This was like months ago, of last year, I believe. And I'm not sure, are you familiar with the book that he just said called The Blueprint for Black Power by Amos Wilson? I'm not sure if you ever read that book before.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. Blueprint, the Black Power, you said Amos Wilson, yes.
Yes. Now, I bring him up because like this book I had, can't wait that your guest had like a year ago. I gone through the context of this. It's an excellent book and must read for any African person to read just to get an understanding of power. But the one thing that's never was emphasized, and I really haven't gone through the book fully, but I've gone through the table of contents of what is projected in this book, is culture. And it's like the premise before, because this is EGUA Marketplace. You can't really establish any economic power without a sense of culture. So my question to you is, with most of our scholars that work in that direction of what they call Afrocentrism, were they on some key or right note, or at times they want, like, even the rest of the people that when they pass it on, and he's been gone for 20 years now, to really take whatever was left and try to take it a step further to try to get the piece of the whole to what is missing to really get our people to really get just the economic portion understanding right. That's my question.
Well, the thing is we have in different generations, you have people who are recognize the value of ancestral culture for one reason or another, either because they were part of that in their generation, or because they, intuitively understood that and they, decided to move in that direction. And then you had other individuals for different reasons, one reason or another. They were either, pushed away from that when they were growing up or as adults or whatever, or they never really understood that or embraced that. So they were studying what they had in front of them, whether it was some kind of Afrocentric kind of material or just talking about history or culture in the sense of, ethnicities and different, lists of things about, different things that happen in different cultures, like the Yoruba people do this and the Akan people do that, and, those kinds of things, those kind of anthropological approaches to culture. So we had a lot of scholars who were dealing with those kinds of things because they weren't grounded in ancestral culture. But you did have people in every generation who were grounded in ancestral culture. They typically were not people who were publishing, but you've always had some people who were and some people who were not. And you still have that today. You have some people who are involved in intellectualism, or they kind of, realize that what they learned in the universities and the academy and so forth was misinformation, so they go outside of that and start looking for a more African-centered approach to studying truthery and culture and cosmology and things like that, but they never got back to ancestral religion, which is the foundation of culture, because they were still poisoned to the extent that, culture in and of itself all made up, and, even with regard to spirituality, these are just things that people imagine and just use to, navigate their way through life. That comes from the whites and their offspring, but they haven't broken away from that mindset or that definition, that false definition of culture. They think it's real. They just kind of blacken it up, Africanize it, and move forward. And that's the difference with regard to what we're putting forward. We're rooted in reality, and the reality is ancestral religion is what animates culture. It animates our way of life. And when the whites and offspring talk about culture, it just means the way that they're living. When we talk about culture, we're talking about what was encoded in us by the Supreme Being, the specific manner we are to function in creation, and then that informs the manner in which we approach economics, the way we approach politics, the way we approach warfare, the way we approach every aspect of life. So when you have a real culture, it's animated by the religion. And of course, as we talked about last night, religion is animated by Bedra, reincarnation. Once you understand that you're going to return, that means you have a specific function, and it's not over in one life. So that changes the way you operate just in general. So in every generation, you have people who understand culture and the ancestral religious root of culture, and then you have other people who do not understand that. They're doing the best they can. But the people who understand culture, understand the ancestral root of culture and its value and its necessity, we must move forward and put this information on the forefront, which it really hasn't been up to this point. The last time people who were practicing ancestral religion as the foundation of culture and foundation of nation building and restoration put that on the forefront, those were the people who freed our people from enslavement. And if they could free our people from enslavement in a foreign land without knowing the language and so forth, in a foreign territory, and they can set up an independent nation and defend it like the Gullah people, the Gullah Wars, for 50 years waging war against the government of America, then surely we, after what they have done, and they are responsible for the fact that we are free as far as politically right now we're not in chains, then surely we as their descendants can do the same thing. We put the culture on the forefront, rooted in ancestral religion, and affect real revolution and resolution, and that's the key. So this is why we properly define revolution and resolution, two poles of wisdom rooted in our ancestral religious culture. If we don't have that understanding, we're just going to be running in circles. We'll blacken up some things, we'll make ourselves feel good about certain things, we'll have certain, quote-unquote, triumphs or victories in certain limited areas, but you're not going to have full independence until you follow the precedent of the only people who actually achieve what we're talking about achieving. People talk about being Pan-African. The Gullah people were, quote-unquote, Pan-African for real. People talk about being nationalists. The Gullah people were nationalists for real. They were Pan-African black nationalists who freed themselves and established an independent nation independently, intergenerationally, and defended that during enslavement and through the end of enslavement. So if they could do that then, we can do that now.
All right, excellent. And another thing with those DNA tests that I find a lot of our people rushing to go find what root trace their lineage is, I find that most of the people that go out to do that, to my understanding, is they want to have some tie to this land. So at times when they find that most of these companies that give their results and let them saying that they actually have more African than all the other stuff that was created, like the Native Americans, all this garbage, our people still go for the stupid denial of it. Just to, I'm not sure either to stay in this land or whatever, but it's very confusing that at times that the European, throughout his own little things he has, tell you that you are African, but all the highest form of genetics, everything else was pollution. So I'm not sure why are people still trying to hold on. Either they know that when the results come back, it's like they're trying to hold on to stay away from that concept. I think it's more of a mindset, or this is like some type of program that our people still trying to deny what they are. And the Europeans tell them from the genetics that they're African fully. I'm not sure if I'm clear. You understand?
Right. And it's based on self-hatred. So if somebody gets an admixture report and it says you're, 99% sub-Saharan African and then you're 1% Native American, then they'll go tell their friends, hey, I'm Native American. You know what I'm saying? They'll take the 1% and the 99%, they'll just toss that to the side and say, hey, I'm Native American. I always knew I was Native American, and now this proves it. Because our people are insane. Some of our people are mentally ill, they're emotionally unstable, they engage in self-hatred, and, this is the result of that. But again, it goes back to us educating ourselves, educating our people, and beginning to institutionalize the knowledge that we have. And when you institutionalize knowledge, there's an institutional approach to eradicating institutionalized oppression. And we did a broadcast on that, and this is what we talked about earlier in the show for the people who were not tuned in at the time, the establishment of FECU, or study groups. We have our page, the FECU page, and there are people who have begun to establish study groups, Nanasom, FECU, and Nanasom study groups in different parts of the country with one or more people, whether it's online or in person. We began to institutionalize this knowledge, so we began to operate every thought, every intention, every action in harmony with divine order. And we can do that once we institutionalize our ancestral culture and begin to live it on a daily basis. And that's when our lives begin to change. That's when we begin to coalesce with other individuals who are engaged in the same processes. Then we begin to exchange with one another, not just intellectually, but also economically, and begin to build schools, build businesses, acquire land, and fulfilled, every aspect, every principle of the nation building process.
Mm-hmm. And to conclude with DNA testing, but it tells you that the European doesn't have no ties to any land anywhere on this earth. So our people, should really stop with the DNA. I never gone ahead with it. I heard people say a lot of people should check it, but it's like the DNA might show the percentage where we're from, but really it takes back to, like you said, you got to get in tune with your non-Muslim and small to get to know where you are clan-wise, because DNA not going to really tell you all that, right?
Right. It may or may not. It may hit on something, but then again, it may not hit on something. But the confirmation comes directly from your Enslavement.
Yeah, correct. All right. Well, that's all I'm asking. Thank you for answering my question.
Okay, we appreciate the call. Okay, so there's one more question in the chat room saying, hold on one second. All right, so it says, so just to be sure I understand, religion comes first, then culture. Like, for instance, the very first man and woman practiced religion, and we were given culture by the deities. So what we're talking about with regard to that, when we talk about, for example, we are cells within the body of the Supreme Being. So just like your body is a great being, it has, quote-unquote, children, which are the smaller bodies, which are the organs, and they regulate order in the body. Those are the deities, and your body is like the Supreme Being, and the organs are like the deities, forces in nature. And then the organs have children as well, which are the cells. And the cells, when they serve the organs, their parent organs or their parent deities, their head divinities or head abosom, head orisha, and so forth, they're produced, and they're serving you, the whole body, at the same time. We are the cells within the great divine body of Nyamewa Nyame, the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people. The organs, we are cells within certain organs and organ systems. If you are a cell within the immune system of the great divine body, then you're going to be naturally drawn to immune system function. So when you're in society, you'll be naturally drawn to disorder, to enforce divine order and destroy disorder and purveyors. You'll be naturally inclined towards policing functions and, military functions and so forth, because you're inclined, you have that kind of fiery power and that specific function. As a cell, that means that is your culture, your way of life. It's wired within you before you even come into the world, because that's the kind of cell that you were fashioned to be. And that becomes your culture, your way of life. And that's given to you by the Supreme Being, pre-incarnation. Certain abosom forces in nature are assigned to you to give you the kind of power you need to fulfill that function. So if you need fiery energy, you'll be a child of a fiery abosom. If you need watery energy, you'll be a child of a watery abosom. So that becomes the way you operate. That's your culture. But then as we grow and develop as communities, certain communities live in different parts of the world. They migrate. They develop certain taboos, dietary taboos, or social taboos, and so forth that becomes part of a clan. The way that clan operates and aligns with the forces in nature is slightly different than the way another clan who lives in a mountainous region deals with forces in nature in comparison, for example, to a clan that lives in the savannah and so forth. So there'll be slight variations based on culture between clans because we have different true historical experiences. And that informs the manner in which we operate culturally as a clan. So then you have different clans, and then the language changes a little bit. Our dialects change, the way we pronounce things change, and then the language changes a little bit. So the language is different over thousands of years, and the cultural motifs and the expressions are slightly different. Ritual practices are slightly different, but foundationally they're the same in principle. So that's what happens. That's how our culture begins to unfold based on your experiences, how you interact with the abosom, how you incorporate those experiences and pass them on to your children. That determines the way your culture is practiced in your clan. And the region of the world, the region of Asasew you take up residence in, and how you connect with the abosom of that region and incorporate those forces in nature into your blood circle through spirit possession and communication and so forth. So all of that, religion itself is, incorporation of law and the restoration of balance. And the manner in which, you engage that based on clan, that informs the peculiars or the nuanced differences of your culture between another clan. So that's what we're dealing with. All right. So, okay, so that was the last call. So it's 11:31. We can stop here. Once again, Yedase for tuning in. For the individuals who came in a little bit later, we do have our publications. We have 16 books that we have published. If you'd like to support the work that we are doing, our books range, the softcover versions range between $8 and $11. The ebook versions are all free, so you can download all of our books for free. If you'd like to support the work that we are doing, the softcover versions, we do print them in-house and in color on our own printers, and they range between $8 and $11. And anyone who orders 10 books or more, the larger orders, those are 30% off automatically. So, and sometimes people will order 10 books, the first 10 books with a whole 16-book set, and it's automatically 30% off. All right, so it looks like we have, no, that was the last question. All right, so again, and yet I'll say for those individuals who have purchased over the past week and supported our drive to establish the physical space for our institution, our Kongwasui Dine. So we are at 10% of our fundraising goal. You'll see that on the website as well. So when you go to the publications page on the website, you'll see the 16 book covers. You can download all of them for free. You just click on the book cover. If you'd like to order, you can order right there on the website. And also, if you'd like to work for yourself and generate income for yourself by distributing our book independently, you can do that as well. And there's the distributor information document right there on the page. It's called No Kwadefo, which means goes to disseminate truth. Distributor information document, and we also have a little video, No Kwadefo distributor video, talking about that process, which you're basically purchasing the books for 30% off, and then you sell them retail in your area to generate funds for yourself. So follow us on Twitter, Odwirafo. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube as Odwirafo. You can also follow us on the Blog Talk channel so that you can get all the updates and so forth. And of course, you can, if you have any questions, you can email us. We're also Odwirafo on Instagram. So, Yedase, we thank you for tuning in, and also Starve the Beast, Feed the Pride, go to the Business of the Week, Kamali Academy, support that business, make your donation, access those products and services and so forth. And again, Yedase, we thank you, and Yebeshi Abio, we will meet again. What's up?